Hi, I'm Raylyn Worcester, and this is Spreading the Word. That's Word with a capital W, as in the written Word, the Bible, and the Word made flesh, Jesus Christ. So today I'm going to be reading to you from my short novel called Fifth Time's the Charm, a story of one woman's walk through 5 marriages as she discovers what works, what doesn't work, and what makes the difference. When we left off, her very first marriage to Brad has ended, and she is now preparing for her second wedding. So make yourself comfortable, settle back to enjoy the story. We are about to start second time. Wedding day. 4-year-old Jennifer walked slowly down the aisle created by rows of folding chairs on either side, carefully dipping her tiny hand into the decorated basket to drop dried rose petals on the ground at her feet as she walked. Today, her mommy and Daddy Grady were getting married, and she took her job as flower girl very seriously. She had practiced her slow walk every day for a week, and she knew just how many petals to grab at a time so there would be enough to cover the entire aisle her mom would walk down. When she reached the end of the aisle where the preacher and Daddy Grady were standing, she turned to her left to sit with Grandma Mary Sue and her daughter Lana Lee. She climbed in Grandma Mary Sue's lap, careful not to muss her pretty white dress with the light blue ribbon that she and Mommy had picked out for just this occasion. Then the preacher said, "All rise," and everyone stood up and turned to look at Mommy, who stood at the end of the aisle. As she stood preparing to make her trip down the aisle, a myriad of thoughts competed for first place in her mind. Look at Grady. How handsome he is. How lucky am I? Jenny did a good job. I must remember to tell her how pretty she looks today. How different this wedding is from my last. I'm getting married at a farmhouse with chickens clucking in the background. Too bad my dad's not here to walk me down this aisle. He has reason to be proud this time. This time I'm in love. Then a button was pushed on a boombox and the wedding march began to play. It was all she could do to walk slowly and primly down the aisle when she really wanted to run. But the 3-inch heels and uneven ground of the farmhouse yard wouldn't allow that even if she tried. Grady watched his bride walking slowly toward him. She wore a white tea-length dress with golden threads shot through it and had baby's breath in her hair. She looked beautiful. When she arrived at the end of the aisle, she handed her small bouquet of white roses and baby's breath to Lana Lee and turned to face her intended. Both had tears in their eyes as they vowed to love each other forever. They exchanged rings, were pronounced man and wife, then engaged in a brief but passionate kiss. She felt her knees buckle, but she remained upright through sheer force of will. She would not let anything rob one moment of this glorious day. After the ceremony, the party moved inside the farmhouse, where Mary Sue and Lana Lee had a huge country luncheon prepared. They cut the 2-tiered white wedding cake purchased from the IGA in town and sat and ate and visited with all the wedding guests and well-wishers. All the guests were Grady's, of course. She and Jennifer had flown out on their own a month and a half ago and were staying at Grady's apartment in town until the wedding. They knew no one in their new surroundings but Grady, but neither seemed to mind. Jennifer and Grady bonded instantly, his love for the little girl obvious, and he quickly became her favorite person. They would spend each evening with Jennifer nestled in Grady's lap as he read her a story before flying her into her room and tucking her into bed. The rest of the family was just as enamored with the little girl and had shown nothing but kindness to her mother. Mary Sue shared that she'd never seen her son so happy. That was the consensus of the rest of the family, who came from different cities in Missouri to share the happy couple's special day and meet his new bride and stepdaughter. After the food had been eaten, gifts opened, and congratulations had been received, the new little family of three drove back home to Grady's apartment in town. They spent their wedding night like the previous evenings, reading to Jenny, then putting her to bed. Only this time, instead of crawling in beside her sleeping daughter, the bride shared her husband's bed for the very first time, and it was glorious. And so it begins. Again, there was no opportunity for a honeymoon, nor was she carried over the threshold. But this time, these things did not matter. Grady told her to make any changes she liked to the apartment decor. He wanted it to feel like their home now. She changed little things here and there as she came across something she liked. But again, the surroundings in which they lived didn't seem to matter as much as the time they spent together. Life went on in a happy routine of work for Grady, play for his girls during the day, and cherished family time together in the evenings, until one day, a couple of months after the wedding, an official-looking letter arrived in the mail. It was a court summons. Brad had been denied his weekend visitation rights since she and Jennifer moved to Missouri, and he was not happy about it. Now he was fighting for custody. There was a court date in Arizona, and she was required to be there. She tearfully handed the letter to Grady when he returned home from work that evening. He read the letter carefully, then put it down and said, "Okay, so we will all go." "Really?" she had asked. It hadn't seemed possible. He nodded. "The court date is a little over a month away. Our lease on this apartment is almost up. We can wrap things up here and rent a U-Haul to drive to Arizona. We can stay there 6 months or so to make sure everything is finalized, then move back, or just stay. We'll play it by ear." And just like that, her knight in shining armor had calmed all her worries. Well, most of them. They arrived in Arizona a week before the court date, found an apartment, and set up housekeeping. Grady got a job right away selling cars at a dealership. He was good at it. It was something he could always fall back on. She was too nervous to concentrate on anything until this court thing was over. She spent her day working with Jennifer, teaching her numbers and colors and her ABCs. The dreaded day finally arrived. Jennifer stayed with her grandma Jody, who was thrilled to see her granddaughter again, while her mom and Grady Dad, as she called him, responded to the court summons. They walked in without a lawyer, simply obeying their order to appear. Brad had a lawyer who fought valiantly on his behalf, but it was clear to everyone in the courtroom, including the judge, that Brad did not really want custody. He was just mad that his rights had been terminated without his consent, and he wanted to see his daughter once in a while. The judge ordered that Jennifer's weekend visitation with her father resume, and it did for the 4 or 5 months they remained in Arizona. Her mom got a part-time job, and she went back to Gamma Margie's. During this time, Grady and his new wife talked about giving Jennifer a new little brother or sister. Both decided it was something they would like very much and set about to make it happen. The days turned into weeks, then into months. Each month when she got her period, she was bitterly disappointed. But this last month of 1984, she was joyful and hopeful. Her period was 3 weeks late. She was finally going to have Grady's baby. She was getting ready for work when she felt cramping in her stomach. She rushed into the bathroom and looked in dismay at the damning evidence that she was once again not pregnant. Crushed, she finished getting ready for work in a daze. She couldn't believe it. She was so sure she was pregnant this time. On autopilot, she grabbed her purse and keys and began the 7-mile trek to work. Suddenly, her cell phone rang. It was the babysitter asking if she was going to work today, if she was bringing Jennifer. Jennifer! She'd forgotten Jennifer! Nearly to work, she turned around and began the anxious drive home. Her mind berated her all the way. She'd been so distraught over getting her period, she couldn't think of anything else. Her poor baby. Was she okay? Was she scared? She couldn't get home fast enough. She burst through the door and into her daughter's room to find Jennifer in her sleep and play, quietly playing with a toy, blissfully unaware of all the turmoil around her. She called her boss and the sitter and told them both that she'd be late, but she was coming, then lifted her precious little girl and held on to her like she would never let her go. She dressed the child and fed her breakfast, then loaded her into her car seat. Never again, she determined. If she got pregnant, fine. If she didn't, fine. Nothing was worth risking her precious daughter for. On the move again. 1984 turned into 1985, and with the new year came devastating news. Grady and his wife decided their best course of action was to move once again to Missouri. They needed to get their daughter as far away from her father as possible, and the sooner the better. Once again, they were on the move. Once the stress of their months in Arizona were behind them, though, the couple's fondest wish came true. She was finally expecting. It seemed like everything bad was behind them, and their new life together held only bright possibilities. In April, the family was helping Grady's mom and dad work in their garden when Grady shared more unexpected news. He had visited a recruiter and had signed up to join the Air Force. He had to be in St. Louis for his physical almost immediately. She reeled in shock. This was not something they had discussed. It had happened suddenly and without her knowledge. She had a 4.5-year-old, was pregnant, and was about to be left alone. She wouldn't be alone, Grady assured her. His family was there to help her with anything she needed, and this would not be just another job, but a career and a more solid way of providing for his family. There was really nothing to say. The decision had been made and the plans were already in motion. She tearfully hugged her husband goodbye, and he was on a bus and gone. 7.5 weeks later, she and Jennifer flew to San Antonio, Texas, for Grady's graduation from boot camp. When she first spied him, she barely recognized him. He had lost a lot of weight. Miles-long runs in daily PT and saltpeter in his eggs, he explained with a chuckle. He wore government-issued birth control glasses, but looked very distinguished in his uniform. She ran, slightly waddling as her pregnant form seemed to have found the weight he'd lost, to give him a big kiss when he put out his hand to stop her. No PDA, he warned. I could get in big trouble. There will be time alone later. PDA, she discovered, meant public display of affection, something she and the Air Force definitely disagreed about. But the Air Force won, and she would wait a little longer to show her husband how much she missed him. She and Jennifer enjoyed every precious moment with Grady until after the graduation, when they had to fly back home. She hadn't been home long when she received word that Grady would be attending tech school at Chanute Air Force Base in Rantoul, Illinois. Although he would be required to live in a dorm on the base, spouses were permitted on the base during downtime, and he would be permitted to leave the base at times. Grady had secured an apartment for her and Jennifer off base, but nearby. They would be able to be a family again. While this news was certainly welcome, it came with a bit of trepidation. Now, over 8 months pregnant, she would have to pack up the car with all their belongings and drive 403 miles to their new home. The trip would take 6 to 7 hours for someone who did not have to make constant stops due to the restlessness of a 5-year-old and the presence of a baby sitting on one's bladder. Then there was the issue of a pregnant woman and young child driving all that way alone. What if there was car trouble? What if she got lost? She wasn't the best with directions, and GPS wouldn't be a thing for at least another 10 years or so. In the end, the longing to be with her husband again and the desire to live as a family once more won out over all of the fears and concerns, and before she knew it, they were on their way. She left early in the morning while it was still dark, about 5 a.m. She had bought a map and carefully plotted her course, marking the route with a red marker. The map occupied the passenger seat in the front, and Jennifer sat in her car seat in the back with all their belongings. It started out a fun and exciting adventure and remained that way for the first 100 miles or so. But then Jennifer began getting restless, cramped in her seat, bored, and fussy. She, too, was getting a little impatient with the constant need to keep her daughter occupied while trying to read the map, making sure she knew what turns were coming up and what lane she needed to be in. She made way too many stops to get out and stretch and get something to eat and take potty breaks, and arrived in the St. Louis area in just under 6 hours instead of the average 3.5 to 4. The trip had gone well to this point. There had been no car trouble, not much construction, and no major weather impediments. But as she neared the St. Louis city center, she was suddenly faced with a dilemma. Here, I-70, I-55, and I-64 converged, and she wasn't sure which highway she was supposed to be on or which lane she needed to stay in. She pulled off the road and consulted the map, but the thick red line covered the route designations, and she wasn't certain which of the highways her outlined route included. She had taken I-70 east most of the way, but wasn't this where she was supposed to switch? Suddenly frightened and unsure what to do, she put the car back in gear and continued on I-70 east, as it was the road she was the most familiar with. I-70 passed directly under the St. Louis Arch and took her through a neighborhood where there were bars on the windows that weren't boarded up, homeless people sleeping on the sidewalk, and transients warming their hands over fires built in trash cans. Looking out the window, she was terrified, and thoughts of gangs blocking her car and busting through her locked windows filled her mind. For the first time in a very long time, she uttered a terrified prayer. "Jesus, help me get out of here. Keep me and my baby safe, please." She drove a bit further when she heard a whoop and saw red and blue lights in her rearview mirror. She stopped the car on the side of a vacant street, blissfully bereft of the colorful characters she'd seen out her window minutes before. "This is a dangerous part of town for ladies such as yourself," the officer said as she rolled her window down. I got lost," she stammered, the tears that had been brimming now flowing freely. "Where are you going?" he asked. She explained, and the officer said, "Oh, I see what happened. You were supposed to take I-55 north where the highways converged." He explained, "It's easy for this to happen. Here, follow me, and I will lead you to your exit." Beyond grateful, she rolled up the window and followed the policeman until she was once again on her way. Thankfully, Jennifer had napped through the whole ordeal and woke up when they were once again on track, none the wiser. She followed I-55 north to I-74 east, near Bloomington. From there, she turned on to I-57 north from Champaign-Urbana to Rantoul. The whole trip took her just over 10 hours, but she and her babies arrived safe and sound, thanks to the guardian angel that Jesus had sent her. The apartment Grady had secured for them was fine. It had some drawbacks, though. Beside the fact that Grady was not staying there with them, the complex was in the center of a cornfield. She had just watched Children of the Corn by Stephen King the week before she left for Rantoul, and here she was in the center of a cornfield, alone with her babies. She was able to talk herself out of her paranoia about the cornfield much easier than she could about her misgivings about her neighbors, though. There was an Indian family living upstairs, and the smell of curry constantly filled the air, which, she discovered, turned her stomach. Unlike her previous pregnancy, she suffered morning sickness throughout the entire experience, morning, noon, and night this time around. That and the fact that the walls were thin and these people were obviously from a different time zone, as they played loud music and talked loudly all night long, but seemed to sleep during the day, made the living situation less than ideal. But the days and hours spent with Grady were perfect. He would walk with them on the base, holding her hand in one of his and Jennifer's in the other. He'd proudly introduce them to everyone he met as they walked, and suddenly none of the little inconveniences mattered. All was right with her world. Gerald Edmund was born on September 9 at 9 a.m. It was a repeat cesarean, so they simply chose a date within a specified time span, made an appointment, and it was like unzipping a zipper and taking the baby out. She experienced none of the drama and trauma that accompanied her first delivery. Everything about this relationship seemed so much better than her last. Though she wasn't actually serving him, she felt like she was walking in the blessing of God. Her sweet baby boy who looked like Grady, evidence of just that. After completing tech school, Grady was given a brief leave before he needed to report for duty at Blytheville Air Force Base, Arkansas. He traded in the car she had driven to Rantoul for one that would hold a now larger family more comfortably, and the family spent his leave back at Grady's family home in Missouri. The family of four spent the next 4 years living in family housing on Blytheville Air Force Base, Arkansas. When they first arrived, it was fall, and the first time she had ever seen leaves change color. They didn't at all in the Arizona desert where she grew up, and they had spent winter months in Missouri when the trees had already lost their leaves and were bare. With delight, she and Jennifer went about scooping up leaves, exclaiming over their brilliant colors, and keeping them to press between pages of a book for safekeeping. An onlooker may have found her delight in the leaves juvenile, but it would remain one of her most cherished memories. It was during this time she learned that you can't outrun your problems. Since the day they left Arizona, While she hadn't exactly been running and hiding with her daughter, she had gone out of her way to make sure they hadn't been easy to find, opting for P.O. boxes instead of street addresses, and the like. All this time, she had been in defiance of a court order requiring her daughter to have regular visitation with her father. But she and Grady had agreed that regardless the consequences, they weren't going to let that happen. Brad discovered they were living in Blytheville, and once again she found herself in court. The outcome this time was that she had withheld his parental rights, and if she didn't allow visitation, she could go to jail. The judge ordered 2-week visits each summer, with Jennifer flying from Arkansas to Arizona as an unaccompanied minor with her own designated flight attendant to watch over her on the plane. Because of the concerns raised by her and Grady, though unproven as of yet, the judge ruled on the side of caution and required the visitation to be supervised. It was the best that they could hope for. After 4 years at Blytheville, Gary got orders to Incirlik, Turkey. He was told he could go alone or he could take his family. Now that Brad was getting visitation with Jennifer again, he would never agree to let her leave the country. Taking his family wasn't an option. For Grady, neither was going alone. He had a young son he was afraid might forget him if he spent that many years away, not to mention all the firsts he would miss. The servicemen had the option of refusing one assignment, but it was common knowledge that if you did, you could not refuse the next, which would almost always be worse than the one refused. This, too, was not an option. So Grady did the only thing he could do. Given a choice of re-enlisting or getting out of the Air Force, he felt he had no choice but to do the latter. She never asked him about it, but always felt Grady resented her somewhat for putting him in that position and essentially forcing him out of a career that he loved. Upon leaving the Air Force, the family moved back to Missouri and lived in a nice 2-story house in the capital city. It had a wide front porch and a porch swing that she loved. It had a sloping hill in the backyard that 5-year-old Gerald and 10-year-old Jennifer loved to roll down, landing at the bottom in a tangle, leaves in their hair, giggling like crazy. It had a fireplace that the children would move the grate away from on Christmas Eve so Santa wouldn't trip on it as he came down the chimney. That place held some of her best memories. And, sadly, it was here that one bad decision, one act of stubborn pride, spelled the end of a marriage that had seemed ordained and orchestrated by God Himself. Fall was turning into winter. Grady was once again doing construction, but there was little construction work to be had in the winter. There was a favorite tavern where the locals gathered, open to close, in the winter, to visit, play in pitch tournaments, drink, and just hang out. The proprietor knew all these local boys and would run a tab for them all winter, which they could settle with their first paycheck in the spring. This is where Grady spent most of his days at this time, while she took care of the house and the kids and dodged bill collectors. Then he'd return after a full day of drinking and want to love on his wife, who by then wanted him nowhere near her. This was the routine, until the day she informed her husband that they were having a Christmas party at the dealership where she worked, and it was his turn to stay and watch the kids while she went out and had fun. And have fun she did. She drank half a bottle of peach schnapps by herself and danced and laughed until she couldn't stand straight. She staggered to the ladies' room, and when she came out, one of her co-workers was waiting to talk with her. "Where's your husband tonight?" the handsome parts man asked. "Watching the kids," she answered. "My turn to have fun for a change." "You deserve to have fun," he said. "You're young and attractive, too young to live like an old housewife, being taken for granted." Yeah, she thought, you're right. He continued, "I would treat you so much better and you would always have fun with me." "Mm-hmm. And what about your wife?" she asked. "Well, she's crippled and can't, you know. We have an arrangement. She allows me my pleasures elsewhere as long as I'm discreet and she doesn't have to know about it." "Convenient," she said. "So what do you say?" he asked, leaning in like he might kiss her. She gave him a little shove and with a little smile said, "Let me think on it." She walked past him and threw a parting comment over her shoulder. "I'll tell you Monday." There's no way I'm cheating on Grady, she thought. But it was flattering to be asked, and she thought the parts man deserved to sweat it out a bit before she turned him down flat. As she walked back into the party, she ran into a girlfriend who said, "Okay, girl, I'm taking you home." "That would be lovely," she slurred. "Did you have fun?" the friend asked. "More than I've had in a long time," she answered honestly. The verbal assault commenced the moment she stepped through the door. "You're drunk. Did you have fun?" Grady asked suggestively. She was too plowed to notice the inference or the tone of voice. "A blast," she answered. "Who did you sleep with?" he asked. "What? What do you mean?" she asked, genuinely confused. "You cheated on me, didn't you? Admit it, you know you did." "How can you ask me that?" she asked incredulously. Did he really believe she would do such a thing? Didn't he know her at all? "Deny it," he insisted. And that was the moment that changed everything. She wouldn't find out until many years later that he was prepared to believe her if she said she hadn't cheated on him. But because her stubborn pride wouldn't allow her to defend herself or deny his accusations because he should know better, she kept herself silent, and he took her silence as an admission of guilt. That was the moment their marriage died. It was all downhill from there. The phone rang early the next morning. It was Carlene, Grady's sister-in-law, asking if she wanted to go to church with them that morning. Carlene attended a Pentecostal church that Grady's Uncle Davy pastored. That was the last place she wanted to be, as she was nursing a hangover and a pounding headache from the fight with Grady the night before. But then she reconsidered. Suddenly, a quiet church sounded like the perfect place to be. She told Carlene she would go. During the service, she didn't participate in the worship and didn't hear a word of Uncle Davy's message. Her mind was considering the proposition of the night before. She seriously hadn't even been considering it. But if Grady already believed she'd cheated on him, she might as well get something out of it. She would be condemned either way. And while she was sitting in church, planning how to slip around on her husband, she heard a voice say, "If you do what you are planning, you will not only ruin your life and Grady's, but your children's as well." She whipped around in the pew to see who would dare speak to her that way, and found that everyone else had their heads bowed and eyes closed. Uncle Davy was praying. She turned back around and heard in her spirit, "But come to me now, and you will never cease to hear my voice as long as you live. Give yourself to me." Just then an altar call was given and the worship team was singing "Just As I Am." She ran to the altar and, kneeling there, poured out her heart, repenting all wrong actions and thoughts and her stubborn pride. She vowed to serve Jesus Christ every day for the rest of her life. That was the day her life changed. That was the day she became new. She didn't know that it was too little too late to save her marriage. But she tried to be more loving, more understanding, a better wife, and they remained together for a time. On Monday, she told the parts man of her new relationship with Jesus and was not surprised to find that the offer had been rescinded. The beginning of the end. There had been other moves, including a home in Eldon on Lake of the Ozarks, but their final move was to Tempe, Arizona, in August of 1991. They lived in an upscale apartment complex which she managed, and their spacious two-bedroom apartment was part of her salary. The lobby had a large flat-screen TV and comfortable love seats, which she and Grady would use sometimes after the office had closed for the day. That and the after-hours use of the pool and jacuzzi were part of the perks that came with the job. She found a spirit-filled church that she loved in Fountain Hills, Arizona, a 31-mile trip one way, which she and the children attended every Sunday morning and often attended the midweek service on Thursday nights as well. Since her conversion in Uncle Davy's church that Sunday morning, she had grown closer and closer to the Lord, and he had kept his word. She continued to hear his voice. She often asked Grady to join her at church, but these days he preferred the golf course on Sunday mornings. She cried out to God, "All I want, Lord, is a husband who will sit in church with me and worship with me and love you as much as I do." She had no way to know that the prayer would indeed be answered, but not now, and not with this man. One Sunday morning, she left the service early because she wasn't feeling well. As she was making the long trip home, the God whose voice she knew and loved spoke to her and said, "When you get home, you will find Grady with another woman. You have a choice to make. Choose me and I will never leave you or forsake you. Choose him and you will be choosing to leave me." Her heart hurt while she acknowledged the truth of what she would find when she arrived home, knowing the choice she would make. She pulled into the parking lot of the complex and parked, telling the kids to go to the apartment and change clothes. She needed to stop in the office for a minute. They went on, and she approached the office door, finding it unlocked, though the office was closed on Sundays, and she had locked it herself at closing the day before. She walked in to find Grady cuddled up with a woman on a love seat, watching football. As she entered, the woman immediately scooted away from him. "What's this?" Grady's wife asked. "What's wrong with me having a friend over to watch TV?" he asked. "You've chosen that church over me," he stated. "I chose my relationship with God over him," she silently corrected. "Not the same thing." After the friend left, she told her husband she wanted a divorce. It was July of 1993. They'd been married almost 10 years. And that concludes Second Time. We'll pick up next time with the hiatus between Second Time and Third Time. If you're enjoying the story, Please like, subscribe, and share this story with others, and in that way you will help spread the word. Thank you. God bless.